So in this one, I want to talk a little bit about a couple little subtle moves of what I'll call evil or negativity. You might, from the Buddhist perspective, refer it to Mara. From maybe a Catholic tradition, a Christian tradition, call it sin. And it may be a little bit of a different conception than is commonly used, or that you might have a connotation for. So the situation I'm thinking of here is one where you're sitting there, and I want to deal here with a purely internal situation. So you're sitting there, you're driving along, you're lying in bed, you're sitting on the couch watching television, or let's say you're having a conversation with someone, but kind of irrespective of all external circumstance, you just have this disturbance arise within you. And I use this word disturbance. You could call it a sudden upwelling of disappointment, maybe a feeling of a shadow going over your heart, a tightening and unease. And you could tell it wasn't prompted by anything in your environment, at least not in any kind of obvious way. It just kind of popped up, almost like a bubble going up the neck of a bottle. And when this happens, I encourage you to pay close attention and to notice kind of the sequence of events that unfolds. And one of the things that I'm finding is this sequence can be so fast, so subtle, and so multifaceted that it's really almost impossible to catch in a single instance of watching, and especially difficult to catch if you're not paying full attention and you don't have some practice doing it. So I think to really start to catch it in the act requires the practice of watching, which can be cultivated with meditation and with just making a deliberate effort at watching what happens when these inner disturbances arise, and then doing so with as much attention as you can give to it in that moment. And so what I'm noticing happens with me is the inner disturbance will arise, and before my kind of discursive awareness kicks in, the awareness that I think is narrating this video, there's all these rapid, almost like little tiny little bots, almost like tiny little microscopic spiders of thought that spin all these webs around it and around the disturbance. And one of the very first ones that kicks in, or at least a dominant one that comes for me by the time my discursive mind kind of begins to piece together what's happening, is this thought of, well, what's wrong? What's causing this problem? What's creating this pain or discomfort? And what I want to point out is that this framing is inherently negative and limiting. Right away, it's casting what's happening as negative, is one thing, right? As a problem, as something that needs to be dealt with or addressed. So there's kind of a subtle creation of an obligation in you. And then there's also this kind of underhanded empowerment that happens where that voice or that framing is characterizing you as someone who's both obligated to do something about it, capable of doing something about it, and then kind of subtly with it, that there's going to be this problem that gets worse if you don't do something about it, right? So a combination of a sense of obligation, of, hey, you're the one who's supposed to address it, and hey, if you don't, or if you don't deal with it the right way, it's going to get worse, which can then create a reaction of fear inside of us, which then only compounds things. And what I think the more skillful approach to it, first of all, is just to notice this is happening. Notice that the disturbances arise, right? The bubble has gone up the neck of the bottle. Notice that the little spiders of evil have spun their little web around it, characterizing it a certain way, almost always with an inclination toward the negative, always some sense of scarcity or obligation of urgency around it, right? Which takes this arising and turns it into something that seems like, oh my God, it's now a situation, right? A problematic situation. And, you know, I'm being a little tangential here, but getting back to kind of the core issue is, well, what do we do? What is the more skillful approach to this bubble arising and or to the arising of this kind of evil webbing around it? And I think to answer that question, what I'd like to do is to propose my theory of what I think is actually happening here. And this is not original by any means, but based on what I've heard and based on my experience, this is my sense of what it is. That bubble is like an air bubble trapped from the past, right? And depending how deep you want to go down the rabbit hole with me on this, it could be from a past life. It could be from this life. It could be this life mirroring a past life. But that part isn't so important. It's something from the past that got trapped and wasn't processed sufficiently in the past to be let go of. So, for example, it could have been some time in your childhood when you were abused or punished. Or it could be the flip side, right? It's not only times when we ourselves were victimized. When we victimize others, right, it creates that negative experience inside of us. You know, from the Buddhist perspective, you might call it a karma. Again, from the Christian perspective, you might call it a sin. Just this time where we inflicted pain on someone else, or pain was inflicted on us. And there wasn't a sufficient processing of it by us in real time to allow the energy to dissipate, to allow the energy to find a resolution. That energy, which could be a combination of a guilt, a contrition, you know, all kinds of energies gather around those moments. They then stay trapped in this bubble. And that bubble gets stored somewhere in our body, right? And we can sometimes feel where the pain originates. For me, I get it a lot in my ribs. I feel it in my throat. I feel it in my forehead, especially kind of around the area where my nose and my eyebrow ridge meet. I feel it in the area around my heart. I'll feel it sometimes in my gut or in my side. I'll feel it sometimes up in my spleen. All these little kind of condensed pockets, these little bubbles of unresolved past, let's call it. And so what happens is, just in the flow of time, these little bubbles get jarred loose and get sent up. And if we buy into that story that that little spider of evil is telling us, which is that this is some problem, right? Some dragon we need to slay, some pest we need to exterminate. Or it'll tell us, you know, this is some problem of yours that you never dealt with, right? It'll kind of inch toward the truth, right? You never dealt with this problem in the past. You screwed something up then. Now the chickens are coming home to roost. Are you going to step up and do something about it? And that framing of all of them is the one that gets closest to the truth. But because it's in a negative cast and it creates a sense of obligation or urgency, it kind of tips us away from the point and sets up our energy all wrong and makes it difficult for us to actually handle it. So working with this theory that the bubble is unresolved past and is arising, the question is, what is the skillful way to give this bubble, right, really what's in the bubble, right, this unresolved pain, this confusion from the past, this unresolved trauma, how do we actually get it, if we think of it kind of like a knot of fishing line or something, how do we get it to relax and resolve and uncoil, right, so that it's no longer a disturbance within us, but is instead just a string of energy like everything else, able to flow freely through the system that we are and not cause these hang-ups or these hooks or this pain as they move through our system. And I think the answer again lies in recognizing the nature of what we're dealing with here. What could we have done in the past to have resolved it? It seems like what the wisest teachers teach is that the resolution of painful energy is attentiveness without attachment and with compassion and an open heart, right? So attentiveness, we're noticing it, right? We're not fixating on it or obsessing on it, right? Holding on to it, but we're also not ignoring it, denying it, looking away, kind of pinching our nose, you know, swishing at it like it's a fly. We're acknowledging that it's there, accepting that it's there, and allowing our attention to naturally notice its behavior and its conduct and its passing. The non-attachment I already touched on. We're not grabbing it and pinning it to the floor and saying, what are you? What do you want from me, right? Or we're not clinging onto it in kind of a sentimental or nostalgic way, holding it to our chest and saying, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, what did I do? Notice that this is kind of just more dramatic energy. There's kind of scarcity and judgment subtly baked in there. This is not what's going to allow that coil, that little tangled fishing line, that unresolved past to finally get what it needs to resolve. It's got to be that attentiveness, that non-attachment, and that compassion. And again, the compassion, that word may lean into a more of a sentimentality, and I don't intend to mean that. We don't want to start telling stories about what a good person we are for dealing with this. We don't want to start to speculate as to what this may have been. As those sentimentalities and those speculations arise, allow them to pass through in the same field of awareness that you're cultivating. This open attentiveness with non-attachment and with a spirit of compassion. Okay, so the bubble's arising. We've recognize what it is, the spider is spinning its web. We're letting all of that, whatever's arising, including our quote-unquote failed efforts, maybe we call them less skilled efforts to resolve it, all of these are arisings in awareness. We try not to personalize any of them, try not to storify any of them, right? Try not to cling on to any of it. Let all of it pass through. What we're trying to do is to create in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts, this field, right? And the charge of this field, the vibe of this field, is this non-attaching attentiveness with an open heart. Because this is the field that if this tangled energy had this kind of attentiveness in the past, it never would have coiled up the way it did. It never would have gotten stored in the body, been trapped in this bubble, been trapped in the amber, right, like a mosquito from Jurassic Park or something like that. It would have never assumed that form had it been processed skillfully at the time. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get the double benefit of practicing a skillful practice, right, which is now engendering a good habit within us. And in the moment, in creating this field, this energy field of attentiveness with non-attachment and an open-hearted compassion, we're now creating a space in which this energy can resolve. Now, one subtle thing here is it's very easy in this moment to then identify, what am I? I am the healer of unresolved energy, right? I am the hero of this situation. The problem with this, right, there's a couple of them. First, we're now getting back into a drama cycle, a drama identification. Heroism always comes with a certain sentimentality and then always under it, right? And it can be very subtle or very deeply hidden, but there's an insecurity there, a sense of inadequacy, a sense of scarcity that's going to tarnish our field. It's going to introduce negativity into our energy field, make it harder for that energy to uncoil. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to create attachment to results, right? So we've got our energy field going. We feel that tangled fishing line, right? That unresolved past moving through the field. And we may feel in our body that it does not fully resolve. We may feel that it partially resolves, but doesn't do the full completion. We may sense that it doesn't resolve at all. And if we're the hero, if we've identified ourselves as the resolver of it, right, you can see where this is going, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, which is actually going to create more negative karma, right, more negative energy right now, which can actually exacerbate, right, worsen that knot that was there to begin with. So the non-attachment to the result, right, and really trying to take just as much intrinsic pleasure as we can in the cultivating of the good practice, the cultivating of the good habit, is actually a wiser practice both in that moment and for the development of the good habit down the road. Okay, so I've been going on for a while now. I went down a couple different little rabbit holes and tangents. Let me see if I can compress this now into kind of a takeaway teaching. The takeaway teaching is the bubble of disturbance arises. It is an unresolved little coiled fishing line of emotion from the past. Evil will mischaracterize it as some burden or pest or obligation, something like that. What we do, the skillful practice, is this is an instant invitation to harmonize your field of energy. Harmonize it, bring as much attentiveness, right, compassion, open-heartedness, and non-attachment as you can muster, right, as you can muster with equanimity. I didn't mention equanimity. Hey, throw that in there too. That's a good one. Okay, so we're cultivating equanimity, that disturbance is coming up, and what we want to do is let the disturbed energy move through our field, right? And as best we can, let go of any attachments we form on the story of the energy moving through, on the story of what we were doing, right? Of what that energy was about. All those stories, let them go, right? Think of it like a river that's going by. You put the petals of the flower in the river, right? That's your energy in the field, and then you just let everything go by. Just let it all pass through, right? And you don't do it in a spirit of denying or of pretending or unworthiness or any of that stuff, right? That's what the ego will kind of chirp up and say because it wants to grab, right? It wants a story. It wants something to milk out of this. Skillful practice, right? Harmonize your field, energize it as best you can. Let the disturbed energy move through and let the entirety of everything I've talked about go. Let it go. And if you cultivate this habit, your energy field will naturally improve over time, making it easier for these disturbances to sometimes begin to unfold on their own or kind of unfold in the background as you go through. And you'll have more success when you are consciously processing these disturbed energies. You'll have more success doing it because, like someone who's had a lot of practice cultivating something, right, you'll be able to cultivate it better, more quickly, and be able to sustain it more throughout the time.